Hi there. Good afternoon. So only a few of you have joined so far. I had a couple hundred people or so sign up. Sometimes everybody comes, sometimes no one comes. I'm going to dive in. I'm sure there'll be more people rolling in, but thank you very much for taking some time out of your busy days to talk about, well, normally I just talk about plants, but today I'm talking about consciousness across the board. Because we're talking about synthetics and organic psychedelics, but they all have consciousness. But in my personal experience, it's different working with synthetics versus plants. Not necessarily better or worse. I mean, if we know each other personally, which I think I know people here very well, you know I'm kind of on my plant soapbox quite often. That for me, working with nature is more natural, kind of baked in. However, not necessarily exclusively like the only path of healing. And so I want to talk today about the differences in working with synthetic and organic medicines, and also even when it might be more advantageous to turn to synthetics. Because even though I'm the plant girl, I honor all paths of healing, first and foremost, whatever gets us to a place of feeling more whole and connected and healthy and heart-led. And so, there are examples that I'll share when it makes more sense to go the synthetic route, believe it or not. But everything has consciousness, right? So no matter what we're working with, there is an inherent that nothing has no consciousness. But to me, the difference between plant medicines like ayahuasca, wachuma, magic mushrooms. Mushrooms are a fungus, not a plant, but still, they're from nature. And things like ketamine, MDMA, synthetically derived DMT, whatnot, is the best analogy I can give is when you work with plants, there is a pilot or, like a consciousness that has a personality that is there guiding the experience. Things like DMT, ketamine, etc. They're made in a lab and they don't have that aspect of feeling like nature. And again, that doesn't mean that they're not healing. It just means that there's no tour guide, there's no spirit or soul-like consciousness that's there to help guide the experience. And so then that can manifest in a very different journey with these medicines. All of them, whether they're organic or synthetic, they're very susceptible to, I'll call them touch points. So they're very susceptible to how and where they're grown, assuming they're natural. An example with that is I was just talking to someone who's a cacao facilitator, and the cacao he works with is cultivated in Costa Rica in areas where they don't even have to clear the canopy of the jungle. That cacao can just grow naturally. A lot of times when they grow cacao, they do a clearing in order to plant her. And the vibration of what it feels like to work with a cacao medicine that has not been in any way manipulated in her environment feels different than the vibration of cacao that has. Cacao that's over processed versus cacao that's fresh harvested. You can feel the difference. So the same is true with synthetics. And here's the tricky part about synthetics is they're often made in a lab by people who are not necessarily heart connected, who are not necessarily coming from reverence for the medicine that they are creating. They're doing it through no fault of their own in a disconnected mental way. And so right there, I'll tell you one of the fundamental differences between most synthetics and organic medicines, not unequivocally, is that synthetics tend to be more mental versus organics coming more somatic and heart-led. Perfect example of that is ketamine. Ketamine is a really powerful medicine for people processing trauma, but it's incredibly mental and it's disassociative. It does the opposite of a medicine like ayahuasca. Ayahuasca goes deep inside and says, where is the trauma? Let's feel it, let's process it, let's purge it, let's release it. Ketamine goes, let's pull out and be a witness to what's happening, which can be incredibly helpful when we're in a state of overwhelm around what it is that we're trying to process and look at. I mean, there's a method to healing, right? And it isn't always, the answer isn't always go deep into the core of it. Sometimes it's like, I need a timeout, I need some space, I need to figure out what happened and get a plan of how to go deeper. So ketamine, although it does the opposite of ayahuasca, it can still be part of a healing journey. However, it's really mental. And a lot of synthetics are. LSD, used to love going on journeys with LSD. I can't say they were ever healing. They were insightful, incredible to have doors open in my mind to find out more about who I am in that regard. But for me personally, I never had an experience of going somatically and crying and releasing and feeling like I'm lighter for it. You know, I had good times, but not necessarily healing times. So synthetics, because of the way that they are typically made, lab-based, typically stay mental. Maybe one of the exceptions for that is my personal journey with psychedelics began with MDMA, which is arguably not a psychedelic, but it certainly is an altered experience. I'm one of the 90s rave kids that found who I was on a dance floor. And the first time I had a tab of ecstasy and I looked around at everyone around me was the first time in my life that I saw people and not judgments. I wasn't saying short person, tall person, skinny person, angry person. I was like, people, hi, you know, and it was incredibly healing to have those judgments wash away and just be in the space of like, wow, I'm connected to all of these beings, which was healing for sure. Not in a personal way, but in a way of like getting to feel the walls of judgment fall down. So I began with MDMA really truly without knowing it consciously, my healing journey. Now, it wasn't until I found ayahuasca that things got really deeply personal because for me, I wasn't working with anyone in a guided sense with MDMA. I was on a dance floor. Maybe that's not true. The DJ was guiding me. The DJ was definitely guiding me, but not in an intentional, personal sort of healing way. But MDMA was still quite mental. Even though it works with serotonin and there's a space of feeling and connecting, I didn't have access to, you know, like what ayahuasca and Wachuma can do. They can find that place that says, do not look here, and flip open that box. But what I learned about my whole journey with MDMA is, again, it matters greatly who and what is making the medicine. An example is, you know, if you worked with ecstasy, especially back then, I guess it's still the case now, they would have sometimes stamped with certain symbols or animals or whatnot. And I remember we got a really good batch of green triangles. And I had a testing kit from Dance Safe because I wanted to make sure I was always taking pure MDMA, and tested it, pure MDMA, incredible, like heart opening, super fun. Then we got another batch of green triangles, tested it, still tested completely that it was pure MDMA, and it was really dark and heavy. And I remember asking myself then, what would the difference be? And the answer was already like, whoever made it was different. And the longer I was in the rave scene, the more the organized crime world started taking over, you know, the whole space of drugs. And it got darker and darker and darker. And the medicine got darker and darker and darker. Still tested the same with my kit, but I could feel it. Like the whole scene got darker because it was no longer innocent, like sweet kids that were selling to their friends. It was people that were after profit and profit only. And it was heartbreaking to come to that realization that my innocent little scene had essentially been tainted and changed for good. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I stopped using ecstasy and going out in that way. So that was my first experience anyway, of realizing how important the touch points all throughout the process of creating medicine matters. Of course, now carrying ayahuasca and Wachuma, I know that unequivocally, that the energy, the state of consciousness myself or anyone is in when they cultivate the plants, when they make the medicine, when they brew it, when, of course, when we serve it, the blessing that we put in when we hand it to people, all of that gets absorbed, whether it's synthetic or organic, like the consciousness of those medicines are absorbing the energy that we're putting into it. Synthetics are tricky only in that typically the people involved in creating them don't know the power of their intention, don't know to first come from the depths of their hearts, don't know to use prayers or intention setting, clearing spaces. They don't know any of these things because the Western world doesn't really hold that to be a priority the way that the shamanic traditions do. So it's not the synthetics are necessarily, worse off in that way. It's just that the process that they're made is almost always not done in any sort of reverent way. And so we feel that. Pharmaceutical companies aren't doing shamanic prayers before they make their medicines. Wouldn't it be amazing if they were? Like, we could really have a different vibration in these substances because the consciousness is a sponge and it absorbs what we give it. And so that is a way in which big pharma could learn a lot from shamanic traditions, is to be intentional. Some other tricky things about synthetics. Well, they're not grown by nature. And so they're disconnected in that way. And in my humble opinion, I think our core wound as a culture is that we are disconnected from nature, which means we're disconnected from ourselves, from who we are, because we are nature. And so to perpetuate the idea that medicines created in a lab are going to heal us when they're not connected to nature, kind of, you see the disconnect. Not that they can't wake us up to the fact that, oh, wait, I'm nature, I need to go to her in order to heal. But that they inherently, if they're synthetically created and hold that disconnection, they can't heal the wound of the disconnection. So that makes them more complicated. They're not going to give us the deep somatic connected experience that nature can give. And the other big issue with synthetics is that they typically are a single alkaloid that is extracted from nature. I mean, synthetics are based on nature, but it's kind of like all of us have carbon in us, right? But if you extract the carbon, that doesn't extract the essence of who each of us are as individuals. If I took the carbon out of me, it isn't cat anymore. It's the carbon that once was cat. So if you take DMT as an example, out of ayahuasca's brew, you have one component of her magic, but not the entire organic, mysterious by its very nature, magic that she can create. So DMT and ayahuasca are that's probably, at least for me, the most obvious difference between what nature offers versus what synthetics offer. Because if you've ever worked with DMT extracted from, a plant like chacruna, mimosa, acacia, there's lots of plants that, well, actually they say all plants have DMT. It's just most plants, it's not in a concentrated form that can be extracted. But with chacruna, chalipunga, plants like that, we can. But if you extract it and you have an experience with DMT, make no mistake, it's a big experience. You can travel the cosmos, you can have tremendous insights, but all of the different alchemy that is contained in a brew like ayahuasca is missing. So it is like taking the carbon out. Carbon still has consciousness and is a life form, but is it the same as connecting with a human being? No. And I would argue not nearly as potent in its healing capacity, because we've taken one tiny part of a magically, organically created medicine and tried to control it. And speaking of control, the other tricky thing with synthetics is that a lot of times the intention behind making them is to extract the more uncomfortable aspects of working with a plant medicine. DMT, case in point, again, when you extract DMT from ayahuasca, you are far less likely to have the physical discomfort, the purging, the sweating, like all of these things that humans are like, ew, that looks like suffering, when in fact, it's the path to healing to feel these things. We got to feel in order to heal. Maybe that's the core way of describing the difference between synthetics and organics. The synthetics don't always bring us into a deep space of feeling. And we have to feel to heal. We cannot do it just by popping a pill and hoping for the best. And that's quite often, at least in the pharmaceutical world, that's their mission of creating, well, in addition to making money, their mission of creating the synthetics. I worked at Rhythmia for a time, and we had this very famous holistic doctor come through as a guest. And about halfway through that week, he pulled me into a room and he's like, Kat, I'm so excited. I've cracked the code of ayahuasca, which, what does that mean? He's like, I know how to develop an ayahuasca where you don't have to purge. And I was like, brother, that's like having an airplane that doesn't know how to fly. Like, why would you do that? But from his brilliant clinical mind, he was like, no, this is ideal, right? Because then you don't have to get uncomfortable. Therein lies one of the core issues with the Western world definition of healing, is we want to do it in a way that's comfortable. And I haven't found a way to heal trauma in a way that is comfortable. Ayahuasca is not comfortable. She pushes us to these edges of feeling and processing the traumas because the traumas themselves are not comfortable. Life is not comfortable. It's here to shape us and to teach us. And the pharmaceutical world is answering this kind of egoic desire of humanity to like, can I just pop a pill and feel better? Which, wouldn't that be lovely? But if it was the case, if it was possible, we would have cracked it by now. There are pills that take away our pain, but do they heal us? No. There are pills that make us feel better if we're depressed, but do they heal us? They press pause on that. And sometimes that's necessary, by the way. Sometimes we need a life raft. We're overwhelmed. We don't have tools to feel our emotions. We need a timeout. Well, then pharmaceutical, synthetics, all those things are magical. But the problem is they're used long-term and give us a false sense that we are healing. So, there's a time and a place, but the complexity with synthetics are that they're made under the guise of, let's take the easy route. And healing is not easy, not supposed to be. If healing was easy, if expanding our consciousness was easy, we would be really bored here in Earth School. And we are not bored because it is not, we didn't come here for it to be easy. We came here to learn and expand. And that means it's a pressure cooker of intensity. The plants know that because they're organically connected to consciousness in this way. They support us through that process, but they don't do it for us. And that's one of the really big challenges of all of us working with plant medicines after being indoctrinated by the Western world is, I know for me, I came to plant medicine with the consciousness of, hey, just make things better. Can you just make things better for me? Come on, Aya, just do it. And I learned the hard way, as most of us do, of like, I have to do it. She teaches me all through the 20 years I've been working with her, but I have to do it. And the Western world has done us a disservice by saying, here, take this pill. The pill will do it, because the pill never did. Otherwise, we wouldn't be turning to plant medicines in a state of desperation, many of us, because the Western world, the Western medical world is fantastic. If you hack off a limb and you need help in an urgent state, it is not adept at healing. And all of us are waking up to that and going back to nature for that healing. And that's why I think 9 times out of 10, turning to organic medicines is much more potent than synthetics when we are ready to heal. Now, when is it more advantageous to turn to synthetics? Lots of potential scenarios. I've mentioned kind of 1 or 2 is when we're in a state of crisis and we're not grounded and we're not, maybe we don't have the tools or the awareness that it's safe to feel our emotions. Then we can turn to a medicine like MDMA, ketamine, and get help just getting a big picture view, understanding the process of healing more, understanding ourselves more. That's a completely valid space to say, I'm not going to nature yet, because nature is no joke. Nature is wild and intense and honest. So maybe we're not ready, and that's okay. Just not to be fooled into thinking going the synthetic route is a permanent space of healing, that it will solve the issue. It's a temporary space of getting a life raft, of getting a different perspective on things. Another example of a time when it might be better to turn to synthetics is it depends on the medicine. Ibogaine is a perfect example. So iboga, the plant where ibogaine comes from, is almost completely endangered. And because of that, we have to rely on synthetically, what do they call it? There's a specific term that the ibogaine world calls the medicine, the pharmaceutical grade ibogaine, which is essentially extracted but manipulated. And so it's kind of a hybrid. You know, it's not completely made in a lab, but it's definitely not in its natural form. But because iboga is near extinct from overharvesting, and it takes a long time to grow iboga to a state of maturity, here is the conundrum that we face. Is, do we wait for nature to mature because of our karma of overharvesting iboga? Or do we acknowledge that saving lives is just as important as honoring nature? Because ibogaine in particular is an answer to the opiate overdose pandemic. Ibogaine is the only medicine that I know of that resets an opiate addict's neurochemistry back to a pre-addicted state within about 45 minutes of taking a flood dose. Now, if you just work with iboga, the natural form of it, although iboga has ibogaine in it, it's not enough ibogaine to create that neurological reset. So somewhere along the way, they realized that concentrated ibogaine is the only way to give the addict an opportunity to come through the throes of addiction. And you may know this already, but a couple of years ago, an opiate overdose became the #1 cause of accidental death in the North Americas. It surpassed car accidents. So that's the real pandemic, right? People dying of opiate overdoses. So this is where this area of ibogaine is where I got humbled and realized maybe plant medicine isn't always the answer, because if I stand on my soapbox and say, no, we must always work with nature, then thousands and thousands and thousands of more people will die of opiate overdoses. So there's where I started shifting my perspective of like, wait a second, that's a priority too. These lives matter. And working with synthetic ibogaine, in part because it's not readily available in nature in its natural form, iboga, and also in part because just working with iboga alone isn't enough to reset the chemistry, then you can see there's a very good case for saying synthetics can save the day here. Now, working with ibogaine as an opiate addict doesn't fix the whole journey of the reason why someone became addicted. It gives them an opportunity to reset. So my partner actually works with ibogaine, and one of the things we do with the clients that come through her clinic is once they reground in after working with ibogaine, 3-6 months down the line, when they are called to work with organic medicines like ayahuasca and go deeper into the reasons why they became an addict to begin with, that's an essential part of the healing. But ayahuasca can't do what ibogaine can do in resetting the neurochemistry, which pushes them quickly through the post-acute withdrawal symptoms. And the post-acute withdrawal symptoms are the reasons why so many people relapse, is it's a physical issue. And Aya doesn't access the receptor sites of the opiate sites in our bodies the way that ibogaine does. So that is another very legitimate reason of why we would want to work with synthetics. Let's see, people, I think I mentioned this in regards to ketamine, but like people that need a mental distance, you know, just the mind gets a really bad rap sometimes, that in our world we're too mental. But the truth is that sometimes we're really attached to the mental space because it feels safer. I know this is true for me, is like, gosh, when I'm really deeply embodied, there's a lot to feel. There's a lot to process. And I need a break sometimes from being fully immersed into the somatic experience of being conscious of all that I'm carrying. So it is beautiful to take a break and just be in our minds and to have that like 30,000 foot view that something like ketamine can give, of like, here's what you're dealing with. It can also depersonalize traumas that we've been through. I remember when I worked with ketamine the first time, again, recreationally, but I saw an event in my past that was traumatic, but it happened to a doll instead of me. And I remember going, wow, that's genius, because watching it happen to a doll doesn't feel so personal. It's like watching a movie instead of reliving something traumatic. And I didn't even recognize in the moment how healing that was until long after, of like, yeah, I can see how being disassociated and having a 30,000 foot view was helpful. It didn't heal the emotions of the trauma that I was carrying because I didn't feel anything with it, but it was a good step into acknowledging that it was safe to face this trauma. So there's another example of when synthetics are appropriate, are advantageous. I think I covered all of them. Yeah. So all that said, although nature is our source of do I want to say permanent healing, of completion of healing, because we're never healed, right? We're always working on the next layer of who we are. I don't think we can fully come into a space of healing any trauma without accessing nature in some form, because we are nature. We are made of air, water, earth, fire. We are made of all of the elements that she is made of. We might have spirits and souls that come from the celestial cosmos, but we are here in Earth School in a body that is made of her. So just from a purely logical standpoint, I can't decipher how I can experience total healing by working with something that wasn't made from her. I can take a step along the path, but I can't come home to the fact that I am nature and reconnect with my essence by working with something made in the lab, especially with people that are unconscious to, creating that sense of connection. So that's my soapbox 2 cents. I welcome your perspectives and questions. Let's see, Kathy, I see you say, would you be able to access this type of cacao? Can you share your friend's source? Unfortunately, not yet. But just today in the conversation with him, he's working. So this tribe of people in Costa Rica that work with cacao in this way, they were never conquered by the conquistadors either. So they're very isolated, but he's working with them to see if he can bring their cacao to the world in a way that's full of reciprocity and honoring and supporting them. He hasn't cracked that code yet, but it's in progress. If you love cacao, though, there's a cacao brand called Origin that is created by a friend of mine in Colombia, that I know that they do it in a way that is full of reciprocity and honoring the tribes, and it's quite beautiful. So that's my go-to right now, but I'll keep you posted when the Costa Rica folks are able to share their medicine. Questions or comments about any of that? Jose?
Yeah, hello. Question in regards to, like, if you do get your hands on anything from shrooms or LSD or something, you don't know the source, but that's the only thing that's available to you. What I've done in the past is kind of sit in meditation or kind of give the mushrooms a blessing. Is there a process that you would recommend going through, like a step-by-step to kind of help cleanse the energy of whether it's synthetic or plant material that you didn't grow yourself?
Yeah, it's a super good question, because I mean, we can look at something like the cannabis industry, where it is often legal now in places, but often grown without access to the sun, plenty of chemicals, and not a lot of heart quite often. And so a lot of us are working with medicines that have tainted energy, let's say that. So yeah, I mean, essentially first owning the power of ourselves to be alchemists, like, we can do this with our food, by the way. I mean, our food sources are full of all kinds of touch points that are less than ideal. And to first have the discipline of being heart connected, I'll use the example again of what most of us have been conditioned to do, whether it's eating food or taking supplements. It's just to toss it back unconsciously. Like, I'm going to take my pills today. I'm going to eat my food. Bring consciousness to it. Consciousness is the energy of alchemy. So do I have a step-by-step process? Well, not really. I have a commitment to intention and being heart connected, to not being unconscious when I take any medicines. And so when I work with cannabis or mushrooms or anything that has come from a source I'm not aware of, just to sit first, anchor into the heart space, of course, be clear on our intentions, talk to the energy of the medicine. And quite often we intuitively know if it feels clean or not so much. I mean, again, I'll use the example with food. You're in the grocery store, you're standing in front of a bushel of apples, you need a couple apples, you reach out for an apple and you go, no, not that one, this one. That is this intuition speaking to us of that one doesn't feel good, I want this apple. So we can do the same with our medicine is like, it feels great, fantastic, take it. It doesn't feel good. Okay, what does it need? Stick of sage, grab a medicine that is about purification and cleaning. And then ask again, how does it feel? Because in some cases, it's going to just need a little polish. In some cases, you're going to want to clean deeply. But to trust ourselves that if it feels, whatever we're feeling is wonderful, true information. But I hold that whatever it is that we're feeling can be cleaned. We are alchemists. We can take something that came from maybe a less than ideal processing, like cultivation, and we can clean it with the power of our intention. Use the energy of the full moon. We just had one yesterday. I put crystals and medicines out in the full moon and ask her to clean things. In addition to crystals, plants, things that carry that vibration of purification. So we can always ask for help. And if any of you have suggestions around that too, I welcome it because we all have our different process, but to pay attention when it doesn't feel good and to not just take it anyway and hope for the best. Like there's so many ways that we can alchemize the energy of our food and our medicines. What do you do, Jose?
So with the shrooms, I don't grow them myself, so I'll buy them. And sometimes like the vendors are not, the energy is not the same, so, but it's my only source that I can get them. So I'll bring them home and I'll blow sage, I'll set an intention, pray. But also there's this thing that I've been studying, it's called biogeometry. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they have these charging plates. So I'll put it on there and it balances the energy. So I do notice when I do that step, the medicine seems more potent as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. They're back there further on my altar. I have sacred geometry, like stickers, things like that help to clean. That's a badass technique that you're naming.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I'll even wear this too, and it's based on biogeometry. It's like an ancient Egyptian type of way to modulate energy. So it's supposed to protect from EMF and everything too, but I use it, with the plant sources that I use as well.
I have one of those pendants next to my bed to block the EMF energy because I have power lines outside my house. Yeah. So I do certain things like that to protect from the world that we live in. So yeah, that's brilliant. That's perfect. I mean, the answer to the question is always do whatever works, which is kind of I realize a backwards way of answering it, but our relationship with the tools is what manifests the results of the alchemy. So in other words, if we use something that we don't really feel connected to and we don't think is going to work, it's not going to work. The energy of the medicine is going to feel the same. But you have found something that you believe in, that you feel like strong enough about, you're even wearing it, trust that it works, lead into it. And that's perfect.
Yeah. I do sometimes, there's the emotional, your intuition. But then sometimes I try to find balance between that and my own judgment, if that makes sense. Because I'll look at let's say a mushroom and it looks ugly or it looks dried or, the appearance of it. But then I'll take it and it's actually a pleasant experience. So there's like a space in between where you're, that balance between following your heart space and some logic, it can be tricky sometimes.
Well, yeah, because what you're describing is how the mind likes to take over and tell us it's intuition.
Yeah.
By judgments, by mushrooms aren't the most attractive things in the world. And we could be reacting to a judgment that's coming from our minds rather than a feeling. of intuition. One of the things I like to use with that is different pendulums. I'll use a pendulum held in front of my solar plexus to ask a yes or no question of my body. And that's, one of the ways I get out of my head. And quite often what I think is the truth is the opposite of what my body tells me. And I'm like, this thing, crafty little consciousness up there that likes to be the authority on all things. So yeah, to have different tricks where we can feel like we really are body connected or heart connected and make decisions from that place. That's why I use the example of the apple, because that happens in a split second with most of us when we're doing that. Is that feels, nope, that one. And we don't even think about it. We just do things like that all the time because we're animals in the animal kingdom using our intuition. It's just we don't consciously recognize it very often. And that's a skill set that we want to develop more and more as we work with the plants in a conscious way, because we can then access what we really feel rather than what we're thinking. It is tricky. Other questions?
Okay.
Thomas,
Hi.
hi.
Got a question for you. I'll acknowledge that I prefer the easy road, and I kind of lean towards the synthetics, and I do that really for the joy of life, for being connected, and it brings me right to the joy of life, and I'm just happy to be alive. It makes me feel more electric and alive and just super aware, and so I really I enjoy it. But then, like you said, it's very insightful. And then I guess this question probably might lean more towards the natural medicine. So like when you get these insights, or how do you discern the source of these messages? I mean, would it be spirit entities, of the plant consciousness, or universal consciousness, or human consciousness? And again, does universal consciousness, I guess it would entail plant consciousness and human consciousness, which I think are probably some of a different spectrum, but go along. But then, so how do you discern the source, whether it be from the spirit world or from like perhaps your own higher self or your ego? So, you get these messages and insights like, is that really just your ego or your higher self? Or really is it you're tapping into the universal Akashic field and it's coming from that? So is there any way, subtle nuances or observations you've had?
I love this question. It's related to what Jose brought in, is like,
Yes.
Where's the source of the information? How do I trust it? So one of the ways that I measure that is, well, two things. First, do I feel it in my body? Like, some insight of, Kat, you need to quit your job and move to the jungle. Well, that's interesting. Okay. Is that coming from ayahuasca? Is that coming from some nefarious little being that wants me to screw up my life? Is that coming from the highest part of me? Well, I do this thing all the time of putting my hand on my solar plexus on my belly, because that's my sign of come into your body and feel it. And if I can feel some resonance of truth or resistance, it's at least more information that feels like it's just from a deeper source, not just from my mind. But ultimately, Thomas, I think my answer to that is really trust the results. Trust the results of stepping forward with whatever the information is. And we have to allow ourselves the permission of taking actions on things that may not turn out the way we want them to. The results might be, that was my ego, and that's okay. Like, we have to give ourselves permission from coming from that place because it's inevitable. But I trust results more than I trust my own analysis of who something is coming from, a transmission. So if I get a transmission to do something, or that something in my past has happened, I create action items, if you will, to move forward with that. And I trust what is reflected back. I trust the divine mirror of the universe more than I do my own ego's like deciphering of what's happening. And also I want to add that kind of ultimately, it doesn't matter where communications are coming from, right? It's all consciousness. Like, it matters the results of how it makes us feel. Like, what does it bring to our lives? I mean, you just mentioned working with synthetics brings you joy. Well, then screw what anybody else says about it's better to work with plants. You're having an amazing time. That's what matters. That's what matters. But we also have to be honest with ourselves of, am I having an amazing time? Am I hiding from things? Am I moving forward? But that's up to each of us as individuals to have our own integrity around what our path looks like. But if your results with any communication are awesome, who cares where it came from? No, that's just more mental masturbation of the mind wanting to go, was that ayahuasca? Was it me? Who was that? If it's awesome, it's awesome. If it's not, then don't listen to it. You know, we have free will.
Thanks. I
How's
like
that
that
feel?
answer. Thank you.
Absolutely. Great question. Anybody want to comment on that or ask anything else? But these are awesome topics. Anybody else want to sing the praises of synthetics? I welcome to that. Thomas is having fun.
I have a quick question, if that's okay. Unless
Absolutely.
anyone else wants to jump in on that topic. It's a question about like kind of where you draw the line between nature and not nature. And also just like hearing you talk about how, okay, we're all nature, right? So if I happen to be a chemist in a lab and was, you know, is it about my consciousness or my intention when I'm distilling LSD or MDMA or something like that? Is that like, where do you draw the line? And then it also relates to my more specific question is I'm a mushroom cultivator. I've been doing that for a pretty long time and am starting to experiment with like extractions and things like that. And I just wondered how you feel about that. I think that some people have like some just digestive issues with chitin or whatever else is in the mushroom, and that maybe just it serves them a little better in different kind of formats, I guess you could say. So yeah, so kind of where's the line? And then also I often usually grind the dried mushrooms into a powder and then mix it into chocolate. That works the best for my stomach. It also is a little more intense experience, like in terms of like it's a little more condensed into a shorter time period. And I wonder if I remember I read something or heard something about someone say, well, they probably don't really like being put into the coffee grinder and ground up like that. And I was like, ever since then, I've been like, oh my God, I probably wouldn't like that either. Like, am I doing it? Am I being dishonorable to the medicine by doing something like that? Whether it's grinding it up, extracting it, or whatever. Sorry, there's a lot of questions there.
Excellent questions, but you kind of began to answer it in the last thing that you brought in. We could also be projecting onto the mushrooms that they don't like to be ground up. Ask them. It's your relationship with this medicine, right? And this is one of the conditions of our Western mindset is we forget that we're in relationship with nature and everything is nature, and we can ask. And what comes through for you might be different from what comes through for someone else, but neither one is wrong. So the core of the original question you asked around where do I draw the line just between like what we can call natural and what is synthetic, it is more about our conscious awareness. So the people that are in relationship with the medicines that they work with, whether they're synthetically extracted like ibogaine or naturally grown like mushrooms, in relationship is natural. Relationship with our bodies, relationship with our consciousness, with each other, and nature as a whole. So if you sat down, did a beautiful journey with your medicine, and they said, grind me up, do it, man. Like, then I have nothing to say except for be a cheerleader for that. Because I also know the medicines, they're so complex that they're going to give us all different answers based on who we are, what we need, what we're capable of, where we're at in our journeys. So it's all going to be contradictory. People that come out and say you can never do XYZ, I'm like, yeah, you can. It's possible. But are we doing it with permission? Are we doing it in relationship? to ask them, hey, are you cool with this? And to be open to either a yes or a no, and to be open to that shifting and changing as the relationship shifts and changes. Because I know, my relationship with ayahuasca, the things that I used to do have dramatically changed because our relationship has changed. But I'm always trying to make sure it's not just me wanting to do something. I think we have a disease of entitlement in our culture, that we just assume we can do all of these things. But if we just ask, quite often it's all good. I mean, I don't think there's any problem with grinding up any of the medicines if they give us a thumbs up. And if we do it with reverence, like when I trained with a master herbalist and she taught me how to cultivate plants and to basically harvest them, she always taught me, put your heart field around them, tell them what's about to happen, let them know like that even plucking a rose can feel violent, right? But we're going to do it. It's part of the process. Ask for permission and be in relationship. And then whatever feels right is a yes. How does that feel to you?
Thank you. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, right on. Kathy.
Hi, Kat. Thank you,
Hi.
Alex. Hi. That made me laugh a little bit. I loved your response, Kat, about just the heart space and the respect and reverence that we pay, to everything that we take into ourselves or that we use to nourish ourselves, like on the planet. But I was thinking about, well, we do grind the mushrooms up with our teeth, and they really do bash the hell out of ayahuasca. The vines, they beat the hell out of them. So it's like, yeah. So it's like, because I've thought that too, because I do grind up mushroom, and I thought, oh gosh, is this, I'm putting it in this grinder and it feels so violent, but yet I would put it between these grinders too if I was going to eat it. So I just think we can kind of get ourselves into these weird places of just tripping out over things instead of like you said, just coming with a heart of gratitude and like curiosity and joy and relationship, so and I one other thing, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the idea of when we talk about things coming from nature. It's like, is there anything that didn't originally come from nature that's like a lot that's like present on the earth? I mean, everything we have, we've derived out of some resource or some mineral or something, nothing just, you know what I mean? So anything that we create, even that we synthesize at its very beginning point, came from something natural in order for us to like take the next step. That's how I think of it. And then also when we talk about consciousness, to me, consciousness is like, I don't know anything for sure. I'm just trying to figure it all out. But consciousness to me is like, if it is all one and it is all like the source energy, then it seems to me like that in any form, it's going to have that original touch point anyway. Like it's, whether it's synthesized or not synthesized, it all is inhabited by the same energy field, right? I mean, does that make sense? So that's where sometimes I get tripped up over when we talk about personalities and or like, I'm a little weird today, so I'm struggling to articulate, but like when you think about like, for instance, taking a synthesized form of a psychedelic and you say that the personality won't be there, I think of the personality as being like extra physical, you know what I'm saying? So it's almost like the chemical that exists within that thing itself is the thing, the tool, the little building block that can go into our chemistry and alter something that opens up that portal and allows us to have that connection with that being. So like, I don't think of the being as living inside the plant. Does that make sense? I almost feel like the plant itself is the key that unlocks this conduit that enables us that communication with whatever it is, the consciousness that somehow, for some reason, likes that vine or likes that mushroom, however it expresses itself. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but sometimes I feel like it, when you break it all down, it's all the same thing. So, I don't know.
Yes,
it's all about the heart and how we approach. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, I completely concur, because what I hear you describing, Kathy, is that we can never actually fully separate anything from original consciousness. We're all
Right.
part of original consciousness. But I add, we're in duality. We're in this place of contrast where we're having the experience of separateness, however illusory that might be. So even though if you take something like ayahuasca and extract DMT, the essence of the original consciousness is still in it, you have manipulated it. It is no longer in its pure original form. And I'm not going to make it better or worse, but like genetically modified foods, we can make something that looks like carrot, tastes like carrot, may even have some nutritional benefits like carrot, but the body goes, I'm not fooled. I'm not fooled. And so synthetics are similar. And that's partly why they're tricky, is they can look like a duck and act like a duck and smell like a duck and quack like a duck, but they've been manipulated. And yes, everything comes from the same source of consciousness. But when I used to say that to my one of my teachers, of like, isn't it all from the same place of love? And she's like, yeah, we'll have cyanide for dinner and let me know how that works out. You know, is it going to be loving to have cyanide for dinner? Like, well, not the kind of love that I want to experience. You know, we have to honor the reality of duality and the repercussions of the intention that we have in manipulating.
Mm-hmm.
So GMOs in particular, perfect example. We did that because we're, you know, afraid of overpopulation. We'd rather create something synthetic than deal with the fact that we're not treating the earth well. And there are repercussions to that. Is it all from the same place of source? Are we always okay? Yes, but that's a difficult way to learn with that energy of manipulation.
Yes,
does that
agreed.
resonate?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a whole other piece for sure. Thanks.
Yeah, Thomas is saying, look up Hamilton Morris on YouTube, search for super LSD video. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Hamilton Morris. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Kat.
I love this discussion on consciousness because it's so multi-layered and complex. And I so want to embody, you know, the awareness, that optimistic view that everything's from the same place and so everything's okay. But that would then dismiss our need for discernment here in this world. And I used to never be discerning about anything because I didn't want to have to do the work. And so I love to have that perspective of it's all from love, right? And then ayahuasca just beat the holy crap out of me time and time again, because I wasn't being discerning enough to make sure that the vibration I was saying yes to felt like love to me, the me that's in duality, that's experiencing separateness and pain and rage and all of that. No, but the good news is it does all come from that source consciousness. And so we have all the time in the multiverse to figure this out, and it's safe in the grandest way. But I'm more diligent about the choices that I make now, because it just makes it more fun here to be discerning and to not just assume it's all from a place of goodness. Such a good question, though. Anybody else want to chime in? Well, the sum up sort of, or the summary of this is that all paths do lead to healing. You know, all medicines available are sacred and conscious, but to just implore us all to be discerning of what we're saying yes to, even if we're working with organic medicines, as Jose brought in, like we don't know the source quite often, and to be intentional about trying to clean, to listen to ourselves. Ayahuasca has an expression she says to me a lot, where there's smoke, there's fire. And what she means by that with me is that quite often I'll sense the smoke, intuitive, something's off, and then just want to dismiss it because it's hard work to then go, well, what is it? And what do I do about that? And how do I clean it? And all of the things. And then sometimes, you know, in the past, I would wait until I was in a 5-alarm fire where it was very obvious something was wrong. And I had dismissed all the smells of smoke until I'm in a volcano. I'm like, ruh-roh. So we can listen to ourselves and make our journeys a lot more easier when we're working with these medicines, and just trust. If it feels like it was made from love, I don't care if that's MDMA or ayahuasca, then trust that. But if it feels dicey, we can be alchemists, we can be discerning, we can make sure that what we're ingesting, food, medicines, etc., is as clean and pure and heart-led or heart-connected as possible. And so for me, it's easier to get that from nature because her agenda is to feed and nurture and love her children. I don't necessarily feel that's the agenda of somebody in a lab. Can be, but not unequivocally. So that's kind of the moral of the story here. Thank you all for being here, for the awesome questions. I'll see you next time. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to have one of these about sacred tobacco. I want to talk about Tobaccito and his complicated role in our world of being both the villain and the healer. So until then, be safe out there, everybody.
Thank
Much
you,
love.
Kat.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.